How far would you go to save someone that you love? That's at the heart of the Berlin Letters by Katherine Reay, who sets this spy novel at the time of the Berlin Wall coming down in 1989. Inspired by Amaryllis Fox's book, Life Undercover, Coming of Age and the CIA, Reay talks about what inspired her to write about this time in history and the bravery of women. The past isn't silent, it's buried. Welcome to Hidden Heroines of History. I'm your host, Gayvin Powers, a published author, award-winning screenwriter, and storyteller who brings women's history to life. Katherine Reay is a national best-selling and award-winning author with 12 novels and 1 nonfiction work. A Pi Beta Kappa graduate of Northwestern University, she holds a master's degree from Northwestern as well. Her writing has appeared in numerous publications, including Redbook, USA Today, The Daily Beast, Criminal Element, and many more. Katherine resides in Montana with her husband and their dogs, and her latest novel, The English Masterpiece, centers upon a forged Picasso found in the Tate Gallery in 1973 London. This is one of my favorite books of 2025. If you haven't read it, it is fantastic. You can meet Katherine at katherinereay.com. She's also found on Facebook at Katherine Reay Books, Twitter at Katherine_Reay, and Instagram at Katherine Reay. Let's go ahead and welcome Katherine. Welcome, Katherine. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I am so excited to be here. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I just know that our readers are going to love the Berlin Letters. And I just read The English Masterpiece last year, and I absolutely loved it. So I was so excited when you said yes. So can you tell us just a little bit about the Berlin Letters? It takes place in Berlin when the wall is coming down. And so can you tell a little bit of our listeners why you chose that and your inspiration behind it?
Berlin Letters is about a young woman. Her name is Louisa Vogler. She is a CIA codebreaker in 1989 in a project called Ven0na 2. That is fictional, but it is based on a real project called the Ven0na Project. And she stumbles across a symbol within a code that reminds her of a childhood memory. So she races home. She lives with her grandmother. She finds a cache of letters that her grandfather received and discovers hidden messages, because she's a code breaker, within them. That leads her to Berlin and the father she has never known, who is still behind the Berlin Wall. So it is a sort of CIA spy story. It is a love story, a father-daughter love story. And Harris Vogler, her father, has his own point of view. About every 4 chapters, you'll hear from Harris. And so it's about a people behind the Berlin Wall. And it all kind of takes place in that last week in 1989 that the wall stood.
It's such a fascinating time. Like you said, it takes place at the very end of 1989 when the Berlin Wall came down. And I remember at the time, it was a big deal. I remember seeing it on the news and thinking back to East Berlin just seemed very cryptic to me. It just was very mysterious, was very, very hush hush. So I love that you're bringing a part of history to life that we don't know a lot about. And it really does have such a strong contrast from the East and the West. There was a lady that I met one time that was traveling from New York to the West Coast. And she actually was in East Berlin when the wall went up. And I remember she was trying to get out. Her legs ended up getting broken and she got stuck behind. And she was not very happy about that, because I do think you capture really well the despair that a lot of people had, that she definitely conveyed to me just on that small bit of time that we had that layover together. What was the experience like for you when the wall came down, and what you know is common knowledge before you started the book?
Mm-hmm. So I was in college, early college, when the wall came down. And from my perspective, it was just this great moment of liberation. And that's really what the Western world saw. We saw this great moment of liberation. It was a huge party. Communism was over, at least as far as Berlin. There was going to be unification. Of course, that didn't happen for a couple of years, but that's what we thought. We thought that this period of the Cold War was coming to an end. And it was all good things. And maybe we even thought there was an inevitability about it, because if you remember, we had Ronald Reagan saying in 1987, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. So there was this feeling of it's inevitable, it's coming. And so that's kind of how I felt in 89, this great
Mhm.
celebration that people were going to be free behind the Iron Curtain. Yet,
Mhm.
as I did the research and dug into it, I didn't really know what that meant. I didn't understand that if you lived in the East, and if you lived in East Berlin, that
Mhm.
your head of state in January of 89 had made an announcement that he said, this wall is not coming down. It will not come down for 50 years. It will not come down for 100 years. It will stay as long as we need it to stay. It
Mhm.
was a complete surprise to them. And
Mhm.
living in that kind of atmosphere where this was it for as long as somebody else told you it would last, you had no options. That just changed everything for me. It wasn't a party so much as it truly was this cathartic, change. Like, yeah, I didn't understand the magnitude.
It sounds like it hit you really hard. And I know that as a writer, we have to take things in, we have to take information in. And so to be able to write it authentically, what did that do to you as a writer to be able to write it authentically and really immerse yourself in those moments? How did that feel for you?
Writing both, I wrote a book prior to this called A Shadow in Moscow, which was
Mhm.
about two young women who one was a CIA operative and one was an MI6 operative, and they were circling each other in Cold War Moscow. Book took place
Mhm.
from 54 to 1985.
Mhm.
And I did the same thing there, got emotionally behind the Iron Curtain. And so obviously continued that sort of, as you say, reader's emotional journey into the Berlin letters. I think a few things happened. It gave me not, and I'm not going to say a real understanding because I have not lived in those situations,
Mhm.
but more of an awareness of things like independence of thought, privacy, individual action, internal freedom.
Mhm.
Those kinds of, maybe, they sound like high fluting words and theories and ideas, but they are concrete and they matter. And
Mhm.
so, like, I met with three former Soviet women while writing that book who said, you give away your privacy so easily in the United States, in America, in the West.
Mhm.
And that is all we had were our private thoughts. And so it's really interesting to kind of dig into that emotionally. What if that's is all you had, could call your own, and how much would you value it? So it was an amazing journey as a writer.
Wow, that gives me chills just thinking about it. I've heard about people who were in prison that had described the only thing that they had were their thoughts. That was the only thing that they had to themselves that they could cling on to for survival. And so you're referencing that as a way of life for people, and that just hits really hard.
Yes, because I will tell you, these none of these women had been in prison. So I'm talking about women on the
Mm-hmm.
streets, teenagers. In fact, the one I spoke with the most, she was a
Mm-hmm.
teenager during those years, and that's how she felt. So you're right. It's pervasive across all a society that's fixed, that is completely
Mm-hmm.
planned for you. That is all you have. That is your own.
That's horrible. Really horrible. But also, you had another inspiration. You had Amaryllis Fox
Oh,
and
I
her
did.
story. So, yes. So, would you like to share with the listeners on how that influenced the book as well? Because that is very fascinating.
So when I first envisioned Louisa Vogler, her job is inspired by the Ven0na Project, which is a real code-breaking project that started in 1943 and it went all the way to 1981. It wasn't shut down until 81. And it was
Hmm.
primarily staffed by women. Women were the code breakers, and they started breaking into Soviet codes back in 43, and they kept breaking into those codes, and they were responsible for finding spies we know, the Rosenbergs, Klaus Fuchs. I mean, right, but it's amazing what they discovered. So I
Hmm.
had those women to kind of inform Louisa's work, but I needed someone to inform her identity. What was it like to be a young woman working in any context in the CIA? And I don't mean any context, I do mean operatively. So I needed someone to inform her identity. And that's when I stumbled across Amaryllis Fox's book, Life Undercover, Coming of Age in the CIA. And it is an absolute true story. It is her story. But I want to tell you what struck me is, if you've ever read those Alex Rider books, fiction, where he's really being, as a teenager, groomed by his uncle to be a spy. Well, Amaryllis's childhood was like swimming races and chess matches with her grandmother, almost things like to get an extra dessert, race to the end of the field. And it was like she was being trained in many ways without knowing it to be a great spy later. And so I let that be part of Louisa's story. Her grandfather gives her those skills, entices her to solve puzzles. I've got a great birthday gift for you. Here's the treasure hunt to it. And so, she learns all of these puzzles and ciphers and ways to think that become part of her DNA, just as they did for the real Amaryllis foxes. And it was just a really, really fun part of her story to turn her into a very strong CIA agent, just slowly throughout her life.
I love that part of the book. And it made so much sense to me because people that we love, our parents, our grandparents, they share with us things that they like to do, their hobbies, their habits, their work. So to me, it made complete sense that we would see her learn these skills and excel in them because she's just taking after her family. And I loved seeing the development of that. So I thought that was wonderful.
It was so much fun to write. I had somebody write me after. There's a character named Daniel who is also a CIA agent. And when he came on the scene, a reader wrote to me, I was so afraid he was going to take over the story. And I thought to myself, no, why would he? He is fully capable.
You were very specific. Actually, I remember you had her definitely say, no, this is my mission. And
right. And even
the line right there.
And even Daniel respect her enough that when they went into someone else, he's like, nope, this is her mission. Don't talk to me. Because that was actually really important to me because I don't think Amaryllis Fox would have ever handed over a mission to somebody, nor should she have. These were her missions. She was so capable. And I wanted Louisa to be so capable too. Now that said, she was a little out of depth. I mean, she did impetuously hop on a plane and head to Berlin. So had she done all the reconnaissance she normally would have? Probably not. This is an incredibly emotional journey to find her father. Yet she does have the tools. They are in her.
Yes, she does. And how much did I love that Daniel showed up? I mean, sorry, spoiler everyone, but I was like, yes! You mentioned him a little bit in the beginning. I was like, oh, are we going to see him again? Tell me when he's going to come on. Come on. And then I loved it when he showed him. I was like, yeah, that's right. He's been tracking her. And okay, sorry, spoiler everyone. No, I was very happy when that came about. So that was good. Why was she forgotten? She's not really a real character. But it makes sense why obviously people that are in the spy network.
It does.
We can't know about them. They have to be forgotten for their safety and for other reasons.
You are absolutely right, but I'm going to go back to say the women of the Ven0na Project. So, that didn't end until 1981. It didn't become public. So in a way, they are forgotten. It didn't become public until 1995, where the papers released that it ever really existed. And then these women kept their secrets. They didn't talk. One of the only original women who spoke about it was Angelina Nani, and she gave an interview in 2018, just a few months before she passed away. So in a way, there have now been books written about the codebreakers, the Ven0na Project women, etc. But in many ways, we don't know about them because they were really good at their jobs and they were really protective of their work. They didn't talk. So you're right. We are talking about spies in many different contexts. And women keep secrets.
Yes. And it's also, now that you're talking about the Ven0na Project, it's reminding me about the code breakers that we're hearing about, the Blexley code breakers. And now we're starting to hear more about those coming out in World War II as well. If you could just tell us a little bit about why the Ven0na Project had been forgotten. We know that they were spies, so obviously they couldn't talk about it, but could you give us a little bit more history on that? I listened to your author's note and you went back to Berlin to do some research for this as well. Are there any little secret tidbits that you want to throw in that you thought were super fascinating about the journey that you had while writing this?
There are so many. One thing that was really kind of fun is I did the race that Louisa does through Alexanderplatz all the way to the train station, looking at the timing, running through, weaving around people. So this book was a race for me to write. And I think that really conveyed in the race within the story. So I love that element of it. Another element I loved and was a complete surprise to me was punk in Eastern Germany. So I had this idea of what punk rock was.
Mm-hmm.
And in the West, I'm not going to make any commentary on it per se, other than there was no cost to it. You could dress as you want in the West. You could whine as much as you want in the West. You could protest as much as you want in the West. But in the
Mm-hmm.
East, I didn't understand the extreme cost. So those kids who dressed in punk and who sang those lyrics were basically telling the regime, I don't want the future you give me. And that is declaring war. And the
Mm-hmm.
Stasi declared war on punk. They arrested those kids. They fired their parents from work. They marginalized them as much as they could. The cost was phenomenally high. And I didn't know that. And so it was really both fun and I think illustrative of the time, etc., to have that be Luisa's door into the East. And that was also true that if you dialed down your lyrics just a little and they weren't too subversive, the East German government would give punk bands a medallion that allowed them to cross into the West and give concerts. And then, honestly, the Stasi would open the doors of the bus and say, hey, do you want to stay? We'll let you stay here in the West, because they hated these kids. They wanted them gone. But the punks would always come back because they wanted their country, their city, East Berlin, to be better. They didn't want to leave. And so that's a true story. And it was just a really fun way to kind of share their journey. And that's also how, in that 1987 to 1989 period, a lot of information was disseminated. There were revolts and protests in all these different towns across Austria and Hungary and Poland. I mean, we called them the Velvet Revolutions. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of punk concerts. That's where they passed flyers out, and that's where they told people in different countries what was going on. So it was really an amazing insight into that time period that I did not have prior to the research.
That's amazing. You're giving me chills where you're talking about this. I was listening to it on audio, and I remember thinking that it was such a fantastic choice to make, to have the punk element in there. And like you're saying, there was a cost that came to that. I grew up in the 80s where there were punk students that went to school with me. And definitely, I don't think that they were taking a stand like they were in East Berlin. And the fact that it came with such, you said, such a cost. I did not know how intense the Stasi were, and that they were worse than the KGB in terms of interrogations. And I mean, it really opened up my eyes. And I co-taught a Holocaust class. And so I know quite a bit about that time period, but I did not know how horrific it was to be captured by the Stasi. And the fact that this group of punks stood up to the Stasi, it not only affected the ripples down the line, but just what would have happened to them physically and emotionally is pretty horrific to imagine. So it takes a lot to get someone to make that choice.
I agree with you. Yes. And you are right about the Stasi. Information, they were the best of all of the behind the Iron Curtain state security services. They were the best at gathering information, weaponizing it, utilizing it. That was their forte. And in fact, by the time the wall fell, and I kind of allude that to it in the book, in the story, but also call it out in the author notes, 1 out of every 8 East German citizens statistically was spying for the Stasi. And I wanted to soften that in the book, because it's a very easy reaction to say, oh my goodness, that's horrible, that's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are like a character in the book and the Stasi comes to you and you live in this situation, in this, police state basically, and they say, well, we're going to ruin you if you don't spy for us, you might be able to stand up for yourself and say, forget it, ruin me. But then if they say, well, we're going to ruin your kids, or we could make sure that your kid gets off that super dangerous factory line and into better education. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they knew how to get you, and everybody was watching everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was their superpower, was information.
Yeah, that was really eye-opening to read about in your book. You did that really well. Why do you think that Louisa is like a modern woman? These women that were the code breakers of the Ven0na Project, how are they Why are they relevant still for women today?
In a way, I think they broke barriers for women today. I mean, they didn't do extraordinary things because they were necessarily women. They were
Hmm.
people who did extraordinary things who happened to be women. They showed that we have the capacity to do extraordinary things. Everyone does.
Right, right.
And I think that was just so much fun also about pursuing Louisa as a CIA agent. Because I will say, Daniel as a CIA agent is going to have different inherent ways to think and skills than Louisa does. Is one
Hmm.
better? Absolutely not. They are different
Hmm.
games. They are different. And I say games in the big meaning, if you go on an operation, there's
Hmm.
a game to it, a flow
Hmm.
of almost like chess, but they're going
Hmm.
to play that differently. And I think
Hmm.
we really dismiss the nuances of reality, of the world, when we say that, say, one gender can bring something to the table that the other cannot. Well, the other may approach it very differently because it's
Hmm.
a different game, but it can be won in different ways. They're going to think differently. They're going to act differently. They're going to react differently. And it's amazing. And I think it's so powerful to respect and honor all of these perspectives and ways of thinking. And I think that the more stories we hear about women and how they handled these situations, we better respect that as a society.
I agree. And it's not even so much as women, it's just as people. People have
Exactly.
all different skills. We don't want everyone to be the same. And it's why when you have a team or you're at work or even if you're playing a sport, you have people with different skills, different mindsets, different talents, and you bring it all together. And it makes the team stronger when you have all those different
Yeah.
pieces to put together. So,
Partly
yeah, we
when
need
I'm
all of it.
Yeah,
Sorry, go
and
ahead.
when I'm writing, this is a huge part of all the books I write is this idea of perspective because
Mhm,
I can be sitting next to my twin sister. I don't have a twin sister, but I can.
mhm,
If I had one, I could be sitting next to my twin sister, and we would have the same DNA. We would have the same parents, the same general life experience, but her perspective on any situation that we face will be as unique and will be very different from mine. And
mhm,
that's what I really try to bring out is this idea of subjectivity. There is
mhm.
nothing objective outside, say, math. There's nothing objective. It's all the way we view things. And so you're right, it's people. It's looking at the way a situation works with the people who are within it, within a story, when I construct a
Mhm.
story. And it's
Mhm.
really fun to dig into that. I love it.
It is really fun to get into all those little nuances. I also love that you brought in the Ven0na Project because I'm imagining if these women were doing this during World War II, they'd all be in their 90s, over 100. If any are do you know if any are still
The,
with us?
the original team has all passed away.
Okay.
But as I said, the project went on operationally until 1978, and then they
Mhm.
wrapped it up and sealed up the files, et cetera, and it closed down in 1981. Now,
Mhm.
for all of my work, I only looked at the original women. So I am
Mhm.
absolutely positive that some are still alive from the 60s and the 70s
Mhm.
that worked within it. But the original women are no longer living. And those are the ones when I dug into their work, there were lots of articles, say, by a nephew or an interview with a niece who said,
Mhm.
yeah, my aunt was very secretive, but there weren't a lot of interviews from the women. You know, as I said
Right.
before, they kept their secrets. But it was extraordinary work. And at the time, just a little background on it, it had to be super top secret because if you remember, in 1943, we were Stalin's ally. He was an ally
Mhm.
of the United States.
Mhm.
And it's very rude to look into your ally's mailbag. So it was not an official operation, is what we would call a black ops operation.
Mhm.
Because if we'd gotten caught peeking into Stalin's mailbag, that would have been a violation of, being a polite ally.
Right.
And but we did. We kept searching into it, and we kept following all of his secret communiques across the globe. But so it was a remarkable project, really.
It sounds like a remarkable project. And I'm thinking as you're talking about all of this, you're reminding me of a conversation I was having with one of my friends recently. We were talking about people getting older, and we were talking about people in the war in World War II and about how, many times We see older people walking down the street or our grandparents. And my grandfather was in World War II. He's passed away now, but he would never talk about it. And I think that they carry so much. There was so much of a cost that even comes to people who participated in it. But as we go down the street and we see older people, sometimes I think people forget that these people that are older, they've had a full life. Some of them have done the most incredible things. Many of them are very humble or can't talk about what they did, but they deserve some respect, some dignity. And so this reminds me of that and about how many wonderful stories that our ancestors, our relatives, the people that came before us have lived through.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this is going to be one of those statements. I don't think we honor our elderly as we should. I would agree with you there. There is great wisdom there. And yeah.
Yeah, I think there is really good wisdom. I wish that we had ways to honor them better than we do here. So one of the other questions I had for you was, why would these women in the Ven0na Project have been branded dangerous for their time?
That's so interesting. Branded dangerous. These were, back in 1943, these are serious brains we're working with here. These women were top-notch mathematicians. Would they be considered dangerous? Well, nobody knew what they were doing. Because they were really good at their jobs. But yes, they would have been considered different. Very few of the original team married. They were married to their work. They were, successful in their work. And if you think about it, they went every day to work where no one could know where they were working. So yes, I do think they would have been at the time perceived as maybe not, we don't go all the way to dangerous, but we go partly to oddly mysterious,
I'll take oddly mysterious. That's a good description.
Yeah. But I mean, they were extraordinary.
Yeah. And talented and smart, as you said. The only way I can think that they would have been considered dangerous is because of the knowledge that they would have known.
Exactly, but nobody knew they had it. I mean, that's part of, that's part of the power of them too, is they were so good at not letting the secrets out. In fact, this cracked me up. One interview, as I said, I mentioned the interview with a nephew. Well, when one of them passed away, and I can't remember which one, it came out what she did. And her nephew said, I had no idea. The only time I knew something was really different about my aunt is we were watching the Rosenthals head off to, I don't know if they were heading off to court or something. And his sister, who was a kid at the time too, said, I wonder if they're guilty. And his aunt got up and said, we have them dead to rights, and walked out of the room. And so he was like, it was this bizarre statement from my aunt. But, fulsome, just all of that work and brilliance came out a little bit here and there, but nobody knew.
I love that so much. That's so good. And then she had to leave.
Yeah, she had to leave.
It was a very wise choice at that moment in time. Just walk away.
And she said it to a couple kids, right. They were kids at the time. I thought it was a hilarious little story that you would always remember about your aunt.
Yes, exactly. And then also I love how in the book you talk about Louisa. She had her training at the farm, so she was having to go back and rely upon that. But then also what was also very important was that she had to rely upon her intuition. So she used her skills, her knowledge, her training, but she also had to use her intuition. And why do you think that was important also for her?
You know what? I think that is a superpower we women have that we need to trust. I really do. We know when something's not right. And I wanted her, it was important for her to learn to trust herself, to be honest. If you think about it, and this is not giving too much of a spoiler away, but it is a little bit. She is an American living in a German household. In the prologue of the book, you discover that at about 3 years old, she is moved from Germany to America, but she lives with her grandparents, who are both German. And so back to perspective. She's living in a culture that she's growing up in and acclimating to, but her grandparents are absolutely not acclimating to it. They are true Germans. And so I don't know that she does necessarily trust her instincts, trusts herself. And she has to grow into that, because I believe intuition is real and it's important. And so it was important for me to say, okay, Louisa, you've got all these skills. You know what to do. Believe in yourself, because everybody else actually believed in her. Daniel absolutely believed in her. Her boss believed in her, which is why, he kind of sidelined her, and we're not going to spoil that, but you find out how that works out in the end. She doesn't believe necessarily in herself yet.
It's also a really good, coming of age when you have that and people have to deal with believing in themselves. So she does have to, this is sort of like the test that she has to go through. And it's love that makes her go through it, which I love that so much in the story, which is so good. Why do you think that Louisa as a character and or the women of the Ven0na Project would be inspirational to women still today?
Because I honestly think they trusted themselves. And we have a lot of voices in the world today that says you are to be this way, or you are to do that, or you are to think this way, or you are to behave that way. And the Ven0na women clearly trusted themselves, or they would not have done the work they did. They would not have taken the risks they did. Now, yes, I'm not saying they lived in East Germany and they had those kinds of risks, but if you think about it, they gave up a lot to do the work they did. They gave up the ability to be honest about their jobs with their loved ones. They gave up the ability to be transparent. So they took on a lot of risk to be who and what they wanted to be and to do what they wanted to do. And Louisa as well, it takes on a lot of risk, as you say, for love, and learns to trust herself and does extraordinary things, which I think we have the capability of doing. So I do think they are inspirational for women today, because that is an issue or a truth that spans humanity, meaning we don't always trust ourselves. We don't always believe in ourselves, stretch ourselves, have the conviction to follow our principles all the way through. And I think that's at any time, any place, that's inspirational.
Absolutely. It's so important. And it's so important to believe in ourselves and to speak our truth and walk our truths. And my truth may not be your truth, and the path I walk may not be the path that you walk, and it may look different from everyone else's, but I have to stay true to who I am, just like you have to stay true to who you are. And we've had this conversation before on this podcast, where living that life where you're true to yourself is a harder path to walk, but it's a much happier path. You can live with yourself with that path. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners today?
No, I've had so much fun with you. I mean, honestly, this has been so much fun. So I thank them for listening to our entire conversation.
Yes, I have absolutely loved it. And do you happen to have a teacup or a cup of coffee anywhere, or a glass of water so we can toast?
A cup of tea.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, let's go ahead and let's toast to the women of the Ven0na Project. Let's toast to Louisa and Amaryllis Fox and any of the other spies out there that have to keep their mouths shut and can't tell us what they've done to help the world be a better place. But here's to all of you, and here's to everyone living their truth. Thanks for joining us. I'm Gayvin Powers with the Hidden Heroines of History podcast, here with Katherine Reay. We're delighted to have you with us. Have a great day. We'll see you again. Bye-bye. If you enjoyed this, like, share, and subscribe. We have more amazing episodes planned. You can listen to them on the Hidden Heroines of History podcast on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, and iHeartRadio.